At 1:48 p.m., a police body camera captures something that would later send chills down the spine of every investigator who watched it. A man stands on his front porch, appearing cooperative, concerned, almost perfect. Too perfect. But here's what they didn't know in that moment. This wasn't the beginning of the investigation. According to evidence that would surface weeks later, this was the final act of a plan that had been in motion for months. 6 weeks before this moment, he typed something into his phone that investigators would later call the most disturbing piece of premeditation we've ever seen. What he searched for, what he planned, it was all hidden in plain sight. This is the uncovered truth about Chris Watts. And I need to warn you, what you're about to hear will change how you see this case forever. The question isn't just what he did. It's how he almost got away with it. Most people know the Chris Watts case from the headlines. A family disappears. A husband pleads for their return. The horrifying discovery that follows. But there's another story here, one that investigators pieced together from digital breadcrumbs, witness statements that were initially dismissed, and evidence that painted a picture nobody wanted to see. Let's start with what the public didn't know. June 2018. 2 months before the events that would shock the nation. Chris Watts begins searching online for something specific. Not once, not twice, multiple times over several weeks. According to forensic digital analysis entered into evidence, his search history revealed queries about neck injuries, the physical process of ending life, and, most chillingly, whether certain actions would be detectable in examinations afterward. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was research. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. According to testimony from his co-workers, testimony that only came to light during deeper investigation, Chris had been acting differently for months. Not in obvious ways. In subtle ways that only made sense in hindsight. One colleague later told investigators, "He asked me hypothetical questions about starting over. About what it would be like to just disappear and start fresh. I thought he was joking about stress. I didn't think. Nobody thought." During this same period, financial records show something else unusual. Chris had been calculating. He'd researched the value of his home, the payout of life insurance policies. He'd even looked into how asset distribution works in Colorado. Now, before we go further, I want you to think about something. How many people were around Chris Watts during these months? His wife, Shannon. His 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. His neighbors. His co-workers. His own parents. How did nobody see what was coming? That's the question that haunts this case. Because the truth is, some people did see warning signs. They just didn't realize what they were looking at. Let me tell you about a text message that was sent on July 24, 2018. 20 days before the events that would destroy this family. Shannon was away on a work trip. She texted a friend, and this message was later entered as evidence, saying something felt off. She wrote, "He's being distant, cold. It's like he's already gone." Another text, this one from August 7th, just 6 days before everything happened. Shannon sends, "I don't know if he wants this baby. I don't know if he wants us anymore." Shannon was pregnant at the time. 15 weeks. She and Chris had just announced they were expecting their 3rd child, a boy they would name Nico. But while Shannon was posting pregnancy announcements and trying to save her marriage, Chris was doing something else entirely. He was with someone new, a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. Now, let me be clear about something. The presence of another relationship doesn't explain what happened here. People separate. People divorce. What makes this different is what Chris told Nicole during that time. According to Nicole's testimony, Chris told her his marriage was essentially over. That he was in the process of separating. That he would soon be free to start a new life. But here's the critical detail that investigators focused on. Chris never filed for separation. Never consulted a divorce lawyer. Never took any legal steps to actually end his marriage. He told Nicole he was getting divorced. But what he was actually planning was something else entirely. Now let me take you to the neighbors. Because this is where the story gets even more complex. Nate Atkinson lived next door to the Watts family. He had security cameras. Cameras that would later provide crucial evidence. But in the weeks before August 13th, Nate noticed something. In later interviews, he described how Chris had been acting normal, friendly, waving, the usual neighbor interactions. Nothing seemed wrong. And this is important, because it shows us something chilling about this case. Chris Watts was able to compartmentalize. He could plan in private while maintaining a completely normal facade in public. Psychologists would later describe this as a level of behavioral control that suggests deep premeditation. But there was one person who saw through it. One person who sensed something was very wrong. Shanann's friend, Nicole Atkinson, no relation to the neighbor Nate, had been receiving those worried texts from Shanann. And on August 13th, when Shanann didn't respond to messages, didn't show up for a scheduled appointment, and couldn't be reached, Nicole didn't wait. She didn't assume everything was fine. She called the police immediately. This decision, this refusal to wait, would prove crucial to the investigation. Because by the time officers arrived at the Watts home at 1:40 p.m. that afternoon, Chris had not expected anyone to come looking so soon. He wasn't ready. And that's when the body camera footage begins. Now we need to talk about something that became central to this case. Something that Chris Watts didn't fully understand when he executed his plan. Digital evidence doesn't lie. And it doesn't forget. When investigators seized Chris's phone, laptop, and digital devices, they found a timeline that was, frankly, shocking in its detail. Let me walk you through what they discovered. On August 13th, at approximately 5:27 a.m., cell tower data shows Chris's phone leaving his home address. This is significant because Chris would later claim he left for work around 5:15 a.m. for a normal day. But the data shows something else. His phone pinged at a location 60 miles away from his job site. A remote oil field location owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. This site was isolated, rarely visited, and on that specific day, Chris was the only person scheduled to be there. Investigators would later discover why he chose this location. The oil tanks there were large, deep, and, critically, filled with crude oil that could, let me just say, decompose evidence rapidly. But before we get to that, let's talk about what happened before 5:27 a.m. Between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., Chris's phone shows no activity. Completely silent. No messages. No searches. Nothing. For someone who had been actively using his phone regularly, this 3-hour window of silence stood out. Prosecutors would later argue this was the actual time frame. When the house went silent. When 3 lives were taken while they slept. But Chris made mistakes. Several of them. Mistake number 1. His truck's GPS. The vehicle he drove to that remote oil site logged every movement, every stop, the exact time he arrived, the exact time he left. 45 minutes at the location. Long enough to do what he needed to do. Mistake number 2. His smart home system. The Watts home had a Vivint security system. While Chris had deactivated some sensors, he forgot about the others. Motion sensors logged activity in the house during times when Chris claimed everyone was asleep. Door sensors showed the front door opening at times that contradicted his story. Mistake number 3. His internet search history. Even after August 13th, Chris continued searching. He looked up news coverage of the case. He searched for information about how investigations work. And in one particularly damning search, he looked up, "Can you suffocate someone without leaving marks?" After the events, while he was being investigated, he was still searching. This tells us something crucial about Chris Watts' psychology. He thought he was smarter than the investigators. He thought he could control the narrative. He thought his planning had been thorough enough. But there was one piece of evidence Chris had absolutely no control over, and it would unravel everything. His neighbor's security camera. Nate Atkinson's camera faced the Watts driveway. And on the morning of August 13th, it captured something that Chris didn't realize was being recorded. At 5:27 a.m., matching the cell phone data exactly. The camera shows Chris's truck backing into the driveway. Unusual, because he typically parked facing forward. Then, over the next 13 minutes, the camera captures Chris making multiple trips from his front door to his truck. He's loading something. The video is grainy. It's dark. But investigators could see enough. Chris is carrying items to his truck. He appears to be straining, moving carefully. making sure nobody sees. At 5:40 a.m., the truck pulls away. The house goes dark. By 6 a.m., Chris is on camera at his worksite, checking in with security as if it's a normal day. But here's what breaks your heart. According to the medical examiner's report, based on stomach contents and biological markers, the children had their final meal around 6 p.m. the previous evening, which means they went to bed as usual. They brushed their teeth. They probably hugged their mother goodnight. They had no idea that their father, the person who was supposed to protect them, had already decided what would happen while they slept. 4-year-old Bella, 3-year-old Celeste, and Shannon, 15 weeks pregnant with their son. This is the reality of premeditated family violence. It's not spontaneous. It's not an accident. It's calculated, planned, executed with precision. And the evidence shows Chris Watts did exactly that. Let's return to August 13th, 1:40 p.m. Officer Scott Coonrod arrives at the Watts residence with Nicole Atkinson, Shannon's friend who made the initial call. And this is where we need to watch Chris Watts carefully, because his behavior in these early hours tells us everything about his mindset. When Officer Coonrod asks Chris when he last saw his family, Chris appears calm, cooperative. He says he last saw Shannon around 5:15 a.m. when he left for work. He says she was planning to go to a friend's house with the kids. He seems puzzled by their absence, concerned, but not panicked. But Nicole isn't buying it. She knows Shannon. She knows her routines. And she knows something is very wrong. She pushes for the police to do more, to search harder, to treat this as urgent. And this is where Chris makes his first major miscalculation. He agrees to a television interview. On August 14th, less than 24 hours after reporting his family missing, Chris appears on the local news. And this interview would become one of the most analyzed pieces of footage in true crime history. Chris speaks about his family in past tense, multiple times. She was a great mom. Those kids were my life. Were. For someone whose family has been missing less than a day, this linguistic choice is significant. He shows almost no emotional distress. His effect is flat. When he mentions his daughters, there's a brief micro-expression, what experts call duping delight. A fleeting smile that appears and disappears in less than a second. He says, and I quote, "I just want them back. I just want everybody to come home." But his body language contradicts his words. He's turned slightly away from the camera. His hands are unusually still. He maintains too much eye contact, a classic sign of someone who's consciously trying to appear truthful. Investigators watching this interview knew immediately. They'd seen this before. The too calm husband, the television plea, the subtle inconsistencies. They'd seen it because this is a pattern that repeats across family violence cases. And they knew where to look next. By August 14th evening, the investigation shifts. Chris is no longer being treated as a concerned husband. He's being treated as a suspect. And the pressure begins. Detective Tammy Lee takes the lead. She's experienced in exactly these types of cases. And she knows the strategy. Build rapport. Let the suspect talk. Give them enough rope. On August 15th, Chris is brought in for a polygraph examination. Now, polygraphs aren't admissible in court. They're not about truth. They're about psychological pressure. And Chris fails. Spectacularly. The examiner tells him directly, "You're not being truthful. I can see it in the results. I can see it in your responses." And this is when Chris starts to crack. He asks for his father. Ronnie Watts comes into the interview room. And in one of the most painful moments captured on interrogation video, Chris begins a confession. But it's not the full truth. Not yet. He claims Shannon hurt the children. He claims he reacted. He's trying to craft a narrative where he's still partially a victim, where there's some justification, some reason. But Detective Lee isn't accepting this. She knows the timeline doesn't match. The evidence doesn't support it. And she keeps pushing. "Chris, the children had food in their stomachs from dinner. The medical evidence shows they died while they were sleeping. They didn't suffer an attack while awake. They were unconscious." And that's when the rest of it comes out. The full confession. The actual timeline. What really happened in that house. I'm not going to go into graphic detail here. That's not the purpose of this video. But I will tell you what the evidence showed. Shannon died first. Chris admitted to this. The children were then taken while they were sleeping. They were placed in the truck. They woke up during the drive, and according to Chris's own confession, Bella asked, "What are you doing with us, Daddy?" She knew. In those final moments, she knew. And then, at that remote oil site, Chris did the unthinkable. Both children were placed in separate oil tanks. Shannon was buried in a shallow grave nearby. When recovery teams arrived at the location on August 16th, they had to drain the oil tanks completely. The children's remains were retrieved after hours of careful, heartbreaking work. Shannon was found exactly where Chris said she would be. The medical examiner's report confirmed what investigators suspected. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was methodical, planned, executed with disturbing calm. And Chris had almost pulled it off. If Nicole hadn't called immediately, if Nate's camera hadn't been positioned perfectly, if digital forensics weren't as advanced as they are, this might have remained a missing persons case for weeks, maybe months. But the evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and Chris Watts had nowhere left to hide. Here's something that might surprise you. Chris Watts never went to trial. On November 6, 2018, less than 3 months after these events, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges. 9 counts in total, including 3 counts of first-degree ending life after deliberation. Why did he plead guilty? Why not take it to trial? This is a question many people ask. The answer is complicated. According to his attorneys, there were several factors. First, the evidence was overwhelming. There was no plausible defense. Second, Shannon's family requested that he plead guilty to avoid a trial. They didn't want to relive these events in a courtroom. They didn't want the details of their daughters, their grandchildren's final moments, paraded in front of a jury. And third, and this is critical, prosecutors offered to take the execution option off the table if Chris pleaded guilty. So on November 19, 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 84 years for the unlawful termination of pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with the bodies. The judge ordered the sentences to run consecutively, meaning Chris Watts will die in prison. There is no early release, no parole hearing, no second chance. But here's the question that haunts this case, and it's the question I want you to think about. Is this enough? 5 life sentences. It sounds like a lot, but let's break it down. 3 lives were taken. 4, if you count baby Nico. That's essentially 1 life sentence per victim, with some additional years. Compare this to other cases. Some individuals who commit similar acts receive multiple consecutive sentences that essentially mean 400, 500, even 1,000 years. It's symbolic, yes. Nobody lives that long, but it sends a message about the severity of the crime. Chris Watts will be in prison for the rest of his natural life. But should the sentence have been longer? Should it have been structured differently to reflect the premeditation, the betrayal, the specific vulnerability of the victims? I want to hear your thoughts on this. Comment below. Do you think the sentence was appropriate? Or should it have been more severe? But before you answer, let me tell you what life in prison is actually like for Chris Watts. Because this is where the story takes another dark turn. Chris Watts is currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. He was moved out of Colorado for his own safety. And there's a very specific reason why. In prison, there's an unwritten code, a hierarchy. And at the very bottom of that hierarchy, the absolute lowest position, are individuals who hurt children. This isn't my opinion. This is documented reality. Prison staff, criminologists, and former incarcerated individuals all confirm this. People who commit crimes against children face severe consequences behind bars. According to reports from prison staff and journalists who have investigated Chris's situation, he has been placed in protective custody multiple times. This means isolation, 23 hours a day in a cell, limited contact with other inmates, limited privileges. Why? Because when news of his crimes spread through the prison population, threats were made. Multiple threats. From multiple individuals. Now, I want to share something that's been confirmed through prison records and media reports. In 2019, less than a year into his sentence, Chris Watts was assaulted by another inmate. The incident occurred during a brief period when he was in general population. Another prisoner attacked him, and while the details weren't fully released for security reasons, the message was clear. Chris Watts is not safe in general population. He will never be safe in general population. But here's where this gets even more complex. According to interviews Chris has given from prison. Yes, he's done multiple interviews. He claims he's found religion. He claims he's remorseful. He's joined Bible study groups. He's written letters to Shanann's family expressing sorrow. Shanann's family has never responded to these letters. They've made it clear they want no contact with Chris Watts. And honestly, can you blame them? Because here's the reality. Finding religion in prison is common. Expressing remorse after conviction is common. But it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't bring back Bella, Celeste, Shanann, or baby Nico. There's a psychological term for what Chris displays: surface empathy. He can say the right words. He can write letters that sound remorseful. But investigators and psychologists who evaluated him noted something disturbing. Chris Watts has an extraordinary ability to compartmentalize, to separate his actions from his self-perception, to maintain a sense of his own victimhood even while acknowledging what he did. In one interview from prison, Chris said, and this is a direct quote, "I didn't know I was capable of this. I never thought I could do something like this." But remember, the digital evidence shows he researched it, planned it, prepared for it over weeks. So when Chris says, "I didn't know I was capable," what he's really saying is, "I didn't know I would actually go through with it." Which means he thought about it. For weeks, he thought about it. And eventually, he decided to act. There's one more thing I need to tell you about prison reality for Chris Watts. And this is based on investigative journalism from sources who have covered this case extensively. In 2020, during the early months of the pandemic, Chris Watts reportedly told another inmate, someone he thought he could trust, details about his crimes that he hadn't shared publicly. Details that were even more disturbing than what was in his confession. That inmate reported the conversation to prison authorities. And once again, Chris was moved, isolated, separated. The point is this: Chris Watts will spend every single day for the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if someone in the prison has decided he doesn't deserve to be safe, wondering if today is the day someone gets to him despite the protective measures. And some people would say, that's exactly what he deserves. But I want to shift now, because the Chris Watts case isn't just about one man's horrific actions. It's about what we can learn, what warning signs exist, and how we, as a society, can do better. Let's talk about what the Chris Watts case teaches us. Because beyond the horror, beyond the tragedy, there are crucial lessons here. Lesson 1. Trust your instincts. Shauna knew something was wrong. She texted her friends about it. She sensed Chris pulling away. She felt the coldness. And she was right. But here's the difficult truth. Even knowing something was wrong, she couldn't have prevented what happened. Because Chris's actions were his choice. His planning. His evil. We cannot blame victims for not seeing what was coming. But we can learn to take concerns seriously. When someone says something feels off about their partner, believe them. Support them. Help them find resources. Lesson 2. Premeditation leaves traces. Chris Watts thought he planned perfectly. But he didn't. Digital forensics caught him. Security cameras caught him. Cell towers, GPS, internet searches. All of it left a trail. This is important for two reasons. First, it shows that technology is a powerful tool for justice. And second, it shows that people who plan violence often overestimate their own intelligence. They think they've covered every angle. They haven't. Lesson 3. The mask of normalcy. Chris Watts appeared normal to almost everyone. Nice guy. Good dad. Decent neighbor. This is perhaps the most chilling lesson. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it smiles and waves and goes to work every day. This doesn't mean we should be paranoid about everyone. But it means we should pay attention to behavior changes, to inconsistencies, to gut feelings that something isn't right. Lesson 4. The importance of immediate response. Nicole Atkinson saved this case. By calling police immediately when Shanann didn't respond, she compressed Chris's timeline. He expected days, maybe a week, before anyone started looking. He got hours. This rapid response meant evidence was fresh. Security footage was still accessible. Digital trails hadn't been covered. If you ever feel someone is in danger, act immediately. Don't wait. Don't second-guess yourself. Lesson 5. Family violence is preventable. And this is the hard one. The statistics are clear. The most dangerous time in a domestic relationship is when one partner tries to leave. That's when violence escalates. That's when the risk skyrockets. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, over 1,500 people die each year in the United States from domestic violence. Many of these deaths involve premeditation, planning, and betrayal similar to what we've seen in this case. We need better screening, better intervention, better resources for people trying to leave dangerous relationships. We need neighbors, friends, and family members who know the warning signs and aren't afraid to act on them. Because here's the truth: Chris Watts isn't unique. The specifics of his case are horrifying, yes. But the pattern, the planning, the betrayal, the family violence, it happens far more often than we want to admit. Now, I want to address something directly. Some of you watching this might be in a relationship where you feel unsafe, where your partner controls you, where you're walking on eggshells, where you've noticed them becoming distant, cold, or unpredictable. If that's you, please listen carefully. You are not overreacting. Your feelings are valid. And there are people who can help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. It's available 24/7. They can help you create a safety plan. They can connect you with local resources. They can help you leave safely when you're ready. Your life is valuable. Your safety matters. Don't wait until it's too late. The Chris Watts case is a tragedy. But it doesn't have to be meaningless. If this case prevents even one person from becoming a victim, if it helps even one person recognize danger and get out, then maybe, just maybe, Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico's memory can be a catalyst for change. So let me bring this back to where we started. Chris Watts planned this for months. The evidence is undeniable. He researched. He calculated. He waited for the right moment. And then he acted. But he made mistakes. And those mistakes led investigators straight to the truth. Today, he sits in a prison cell in Wisconsin. 5 life sentences. No possibility of parole. Living every day with the knowledge that he's despised by both the outside world and the people around him. Is that enough? You tell me. Comment below with your thoughts on these questions. 1. Do you think Chris Watts' sentence was appropriate, or should it have been longer? 2. What do you think happens to him in prison if protective custody fails? 3. What warning signs do you think could have been recognized earlier? And 4. What can we, as a society, do better to prevent family violence? Before I go, I want to say something to Shanann's family, the Rzuseks. They've handled this tragedy with more grace than anyone should ever have to show. They've established scholarships in Shanann's name. They've advocated for domestic violence awareness. They've kept their daughter and grandchildren's memory alive. If you want to honor Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, consider donating to a domestic violence prevention organization in their name. This case haunts me. As someone who covers true crime, I've seen a lot. But this one, the premeditation, the betrayal, the innocence of those children, it stays with you. If this video affected you, if it made you think, if it opened your eyes to warning signs you might have missed, share it. Because awareness can save lives. Hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dive investigations like this. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And most importantly, if you or someone you know needs help, reach out. Don't wait. Don't assume it'll get better. Act. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. And hold your loved ones a little closer today. This was the uncovered truth about Chris Watts. A man who planned the unthinkable. And almost got away with it. Until next time.